He looked across the room and his eyes stopped on you. Not on the person next to you who had been working all evening to position themselves in his eye line. Not on the advisor who had spent 3 decades cultivating exactly the kind of presence that powerful people are supposed to notice. Not on the diplomat or the executive or the person whose family name had been opening doors in that world for generations. He looked across the room, through all of that, and his eyes stopped on you, and something in his face changed. Something quiet and certain and very old settled into his expression. He had found what he was looking for. He agreed before you made your case. He confirmed before you explained yourself. He put you first before you asked for anything, before you even understood what was being offered, before the room around you had any idea what had just shifted. And the people who did notice could not explain what they had witnessed because nothing in their framework for how recognition works accounted for what they had just seen. They had watched this king for years. They had studied what moved him and what didn't. They knew his standards and his patterns and the qualities he responded to, and none of it prepared them for watching him turn towards someone like you, with that particular quality of attention that he almost never gave to anyone. The quality that means, I see you, the real you. Not the version you brought into this room tonight, not the resume or the reputation or the performance. You, the actual thing, the one that has been underneath all of it this whole time. That is where this begins, not at the beginning, because the truth is, you are already in the middle of this story. You have been in the middle of it for longer than you know. Write 444 in the comments right now if something in your body responded to those words before your mind had a chance to weigh in. Because what your body knows is already ahead of what this world has been willing to confirm for you, and that gap between what you carry and what has been confirmed is exactly what is closing right now. There is something you need to understand about what genuine royalty is trained to see, because most people, when they think about a king's discernment, imagine that it has something to do with status or credentials or the kind of visible achievement that creates a record. They imagine that power recognizes power by reading the signals of power: the title, the address, the clothes, the network, the name. And at the surface levels of leadership, that is true. The surface levels of every hierarchy are full of people reading those signals and responding to them. But at the deepest level, something completely different is operating. At the deepest level, the discernment has nothing to do with what you have accumulated or what you have been given or what your name means to people who trade in names. At the deepest level, the discernment reads something that cannot be accumulated or given or named. It reads frequency, the particular vibration of a soul that has been through something and has not been broken by it. The specific quality of a person who has been pushed to the edge of what they could carry and discovered that the edge was further than anyone had told them. The unmistakable signature of someone who has been through fire and emerged not smaller, but more essentially themselves, stripped of everything that was not really them to begin with, left with only what was always true. This is what genuine royalty looks for, not because they learned to look for it, because their bloodline is built on the recognition of it, because somewhere in the long lineage of their inheritance, someone understood that the rarest resource in any kingdom is not land or gold or military strength. It is this: the person who cannot be bought, cannot be broken, cannot be turned into something other than what they are by any pressure any external force can bring to bear. That person is what every king is trained, across generations, to find, because that person, standing beside a throne, is worth more than every advisor and every general and every carefully cultivated alliance in the room, because that person will tell the truth, because that person will not bend their perception to match what power wants to hear, because that person's loyalty, when it is given from something so deep and so real that it cannot be revoked by circumstance or manipulated by fear or purchased by a better offer. because that person is the rarest thing in a world full of people performing, positioning, selling themselves toward whoever is currently at the top. And the king looked across the room and he found you, and something in him that had been quietly searching for a very long time went still with the relief of having found what it was looking for. You have always been that person, even when you had no confirmation of it. Even when the world around you was spending considerable energy suggesting that you were something much smaller. Even in the years when the gap between what you sensed about yourself and what your circumstances reflected back to you was so wide that filling it with doubt felt like the only reasonable response. Even then, underneath all of it, the thing that the king recognized was present, unchanged, uncorrupted, waiting. Before we go further, if you have been waiting for something in your life to confirm that what you carry is real, and if this is the first place in a long time that something has said it clearly and without reservation, then this channel is going to matter to you in a way that goes beyond a single video. Subscribe now, not as a transaction, as a declaration that you are choosing to stay in the frequency of what just opened in you, that you are choosing to be in a space where what you carry is treated as the real and significant thing that it is, rather than the inconvenient and unconfirmed thing that the rest of the world has been making it feel like. Subscribe now, and then keep reading. The training began long before you were aware of it as training. That is the nature of the preparation that happens for people like you. It does not announce itself. It does not come with a curriculum or a teacher or a moment where someone sits you down and explains that what you are going through is not punishment but refinement. It comes as ordinary life, as circumstances that seem merely difficult, as losses that seem merely cruel, as periods of isolation that seem merely lonely, as the particular kind of pressure that has no obvious source and no clear endpoint and no one around you who seems to understand what you are experiencing or why it is as intense as it is. You went through things that should have diminished you. You went through things that other people who watched from the outside with the comfortable distance of people who were not inside those things, genuinely believed had diminished you. There were people in your life who looked at certain periods of what you went through and updated their estimation of you downward, who decided, based on what they could see from where they were standing, that the version of you emerging from those periods was smaller than the version that went in, who measured you by what the pressure had visibly cost you, and forgot to account for what the pressure had invisibly built. What the pressure built was this: the ability to hold your frequency under conditions designed to collapse it. The ability to remain yourself under sustained effort by circumstances and sometimes by people to make you into something easier to manage. The ability to know what is true about you even when nothing in your external reality is confirming it. The ability to carry the weight of your own potential through years when that potential had no outlet, no confirmation, no visible evidence that it was real and not simply a story you were telling yourself to survive. That ability is not small, it is not common, it is the thing that the king looked across the room and felt in you before a word was spoken. The thing that made him stop, the thing that made him agree, the thing that made him look at his advisors after you had gone and say something that surprised them, that he had just met someone who was going to matter, someone who should be first, someone whose time had come and whose arrival he was glad to have been present for. You have been made to wait. This is not your imagination, and it is not your failure, and it is not evidence of some deficiency in what you carry or some error in how you have moved through the world. You have been made to wait in the particular way that is reserved for people who carry something real, a deliberate, sustained, almost architectural delay that was not designed by chance but by the particular opposition that arises whenever something genuine is moving toward its full expression. You have been made to wait. This is not your imagination, and it is not your failure, and it is not evidence of some deficiency in what you carry or some error in how you have moved through the world. You have been made to wait in the particular way that is reserved for people who carry something real, a deliberate, sustained, almost architectural delay that was not designed by chance but by the particular opposition that arises whenever something genuine is moving toward its full expression. The delay had a texture you learned to recognize over time, even if you never had a name for it. It was the texture of effort that should have produced more than it produced, of doors that opened partway and then stopped, of connections that formed and then dissolved at the exact moment they should have solidified, of timing that always seemed to work against you at the junctures where timing mattered most. You became, without intending to, an expert in the particular feeling of almost there, almost breaking through, almost arriving at the moment where the gap between your potential and your reality finally closes, and then not, and then the reset, and then the beginning again of the same careful, effortful, quietly heartbreaking process of building towards something that kept moving just past where you could reach it. What you did not know, what you could not have known from inside that experience, is that the almost was not failure. The almost was architecture. The almost was the precise distance being maintained by something that needed you not to arrive until this moment. Not because this moment is special in any way you could have planned for. Because this moment is when the person who needed to see you was in the room. Because this moment is when the king looked across, and the frequency you carry had been refined by everything you went through to exactly the pitch that his bloodline-trained discernment could not miss. There is a man in this court whose name does not appear in the official record of what happened that evening. He had been there for years. He had built his position carefully, through precisely the kind of accumulation that the king's deepest discernment could see through, but that the court's everyday operations depended on. He was useful in the way that people who are willing to do what others won't are always useful. He had a role. He had access. He had cultivated proximity to the throne through a combination of service and strategic loyalty and the careful management of who knew what about him and when. And he had been watching you from the moment you entered that world. Not with admiration. With the particular quality of attention that is the opposite of admiration, the kind that arises in a person when they see someone who has what they have been working to simulate. He had built a version of authenticity, a performance of the kind of presence that commands genuine respect, constructed carefully enough over enough time that most people could not distinguish it from the real thing. And then you arrived, carrying the real thing. And in the presence of the real thing, his version of it became suddenly, uncomfortably visible as what it was. Not to everyone in the room, but to him and to the king. He could not allow you to be first, not because of what first meant in practical terms, though that mattered too, but because if you were first, if the king confirmed publicly what his discernment had already privately registered, then the question of what you were became unavoidable. And if that question was asked clearly enough and answered honestly enough, other questions would follow. Questions about what he was. Questions about the difference between what you carried and what he had been carrying. Questions that his entire position in that world depended on no one asking directly. So the delays began, and they were constructed well enough that they looked like circumstances, like timing, like the natural friction of a complex system. You were moved back in the order not through obvious intervention, but through the kind of administrative rearrangement that has 100 innocent explanations. Your name was not removed from places it should have appeared. It was simply not added with the same urgency that others' names were added. The doors that should have opened for you opened slightly later, slightly more reluctantly, slightly less completely than they opened for people who were navigating without that particular friction. You felt it. You felt the specific wrongness of it, the sense that you were moving through something that had more resistance than the terrain itself should have produced, that your effort was producing less result than the math should have allowed. That you were always arriving just after the moment that would have mattered most, just missing the connection that would have changed things, just running out of time in exactly the situations where your gifts were most relevant. You felt it, and you did what you do. You worked harder. You tried different approaches. You examined yourself for the deficiency that must be explaining the gap between your potential and your results. You blamed yourself in the careful way of someone who has been trained by repeated disappointment to look inward first. And in doing that, you missed the most important thing. The gap was not in you. The gap was being manufactured around you. The king has seen this pattern more times than he can count. It is one of the oldest patterns in the history of power, and it has one of the most consistent signatures. The person who carries something real experiences a particular kind of opposition, not the dramatic, visible opposition that people can point to and name and rally against, but the quiet, deniable, structural kind that works by delay rather than by force, by friction rather than by barrier, by making the real thing tired and uncertain, while the performed thing advances steadily in an environment designed to reward performance over reality. He has seen it, and he has learned what it means. It means that what is being delayed is worth delaying. It means that what is being obstructed is powerful enough to threaten what is currently in place. It means that the opposition itself is a form of confirmation, that the thing being resisted is real, that the person being pushed back is carrying something that the people doing the pushing can feel the weight of even as they work to prevent it from rising. He looked at you, and he saw the signature of someone who had been navigating that opposition for years, not the signature of someone who had been worn down by it, though the weariness was real, and he saw that too, but the signature of someone who had continued to carry what they carried through all of it, without setting it down, without trading it for something easier, without deciding that the cost of maintaining your integrity in a world that kept penalizing you for it was too high, without doing the thing that the opposition was designed to make you do, shrink yourself to a size that didn't threaten anyone, and call it wisdom. You didn't shrink, you bent, you wavered. There were moments where the doubt was so heavy and the confirmation so absent that you wondered if what you had always sensed about yourself was simply the most elaborate self-deception you had ever constructed. There were nights where the gap between who you knew yourself to be and how the world was treating you felt like evidence against everything you had believed. There were times when the most reasonable interpretation of your circumstances pointed toward giving up, not dramatically, not all at once, but the quiet, gradual giving up of lowering your ceiling until it matched the room you were currently in. But something in you refused the final lowering. Something in you kept the ceiling where it actually belonged, even when living under that ceiling in the circumstances you were navigating felt almost cruel. Some quality of your soul that was not interested in the comfort of smaller expectations held the space for the actual truth of what you were even through all the years when that truth had nowhere visible to land. The king recognized that quality immediately. It is the one that cannot be faked, and cannot be trained, and cannot be built from anything other than what you build it from. The accumulated experience of having refused to become smaller when becoming smaller would have been so much easier. He agreed to put you first because he understood, looking at you, that first had always been yours, not as a gift, as a return, as the arrival, finally, of what had been held back. If you can feel the truth of what you just read in your body, not in your head, in your body, if something in your chest, or your gut, or your throat responded before your thinking mind had time to evaluate it, this channel carries more of what just moved in you. Subscribe now, not for content, for the continuation of what is already opening. What changes now is not your circumstances first. What changes now is your relationship to time. This is the thing that most people do not understand about the moment when genuine recognition arrives. They expect the external to shift first. They expect the doors to open, the resources to appear, the people to arrive, the confirmation to come in visible and measurable and undeniable form. And all of that comes, but it does not come first. What comes first is something interior and quiet, and in some ways more significant than anything that follows it. What comes first is that you stop carrying the future as a weight and start carrying it as a certainty. There is a difference between those two things that is difficult to describe but impossible to miss once you have felt both. When you carry the future as a weight, it presses down. It sits in you as urgency and anxiety and the particular exhaustion of someone who is working very hard towards something they are not sure is coming. Every day that the confirmation doesn't arrive adds a little more to the weight. Every year that passes without the visible evidence adds a little more pressure. Every person who gets the thing you were supposed to get before you do increases the cost of continuing to believe that your time is real and not just a story. When you carry the future as a certainty, it lifts, not because your circumstances have changed, but because your relationship to them has changed. Because something shifted in you, maybe in the moment you encountered this, maybe in a moment before this, that you are only now understanding the significance of. And the thing that shifted was the question. The question you have been living inside without quite knowing it was a question. The question of whether what you carry is real, and whether the life it points toward is real, and whether you are who you have always sensed yourself to be, or whether the gap between that sensing and your current reality is evidence that the sensing was wrong. The king answered that question without knowing he was answering it, simply by looking at you the way he looked and agreeing the way he agreed and putting you first in the way that he did. The answer is that what you carry is real, has always been real, was real in the years when nothing around you was reflecting it, was real in the periods when you were the only one who could feel it, was real when the person in the court was working to delay it, and the circumstances seemed to confirm his version of events rather than yours. The reality of what you carry was never in question in the dimensions that matter most. It was only ever in question in the dimension of your own certainty, and that question has now been answered. There is a quality you have that the people who are placed ahead of you do not have and cannot acquire. It is worth naming because you have spent so long in proximity to people who have things you do not have: the titles, the connections, the resources, the visible track record, the confident ease of people who have been confirmed by the world early and often, that you may have lost sight of what it is that you have, that they will spend their entire lives unable to access. You know what it costs. This sounds simple, and it is not simple at all. The people who have been confirmed early, whose path was prepared for them, whose gifts were recognized and supported and given room to develop in favorable conditions, those people are capable of many things. But the one thing they cannot do is speak to someone who has been through what you have been through from the inside of that experience. They can observe it, they can study it, they can develop sophisticated frameworks for understanding it, but they cannot stand in front of someone who is in the middle of the kind of years you have been through and transmit the specific knowing that comes from having been in that middle and survived it and arrived somewhere that vindicates the surviving. You can do that. You will do that. And when you do, what you give the person in front of you is not information they could get anywhere. It is the thing that information alone cannot provide. It is the felt sense of someone who has been where they are and knows, not theoretically but from the inside of experience, that what they are carrying is real, and that the delay is not the verdict, and that the gap between their potential and their current reality is not evidence of their limitations but of the opposition that arises when something genuine is moving toward expression in a world that has organized itself around things that are less genuine. The king put you first, not just for you. He put you first because of what happens next, because of the people whose lives change when you finally arrive at full expression, because of the specific quality of what you are going to give to the world that could not have been given without having gone through exactly what you went through in exactly the way you went through it. The delay was not a robbery, it was a preparation, and the preparation is now complete. The person who worked against you in the court has been in the king's consideration since before you arrived in that room. The king is not naive about what exists in proximity to power. He has been in rooms with people performing authenticity for so long that his recognition of the real thing is, by now, almost involuntary. It happens in him before he makes a decision about it. And the same instrument that recognized you the moment it found you had been registering the other person for years. Not dramatically. The king did not conduct an investigation, or make an accusation, or do anything that the court's protocol would have required evidence for. He simply began to see, began to notice the texture of what that person produced versus what they performed. Began to feel the gap between their public face and the thing underneath it. Began to pay attention, with the particular quality of attention that power learns to pay when it suspects something is not what it appears to be, to the pattern of what happened around this person over time, to what consistently declined in his presence, to what consistently failed to materialize, to whose path consistently encountered friction in ways that could not all be attributed to coincidence or circumstance. The pattern spoke. It speaks slowly at first and then with increasing clarity. And when the king looked across the room and his eyes found you, and something in him went still with recognition, the pattern that had been speaking quietly for a long time became suddenly, completely clear. He understood in that moment what had been happening. He understood the shape of what had been created around you. He understood both what you were and what had been done to delay your arrival. And he made his decision not just in your favor, but against the delay itself, in favor of the arrival, in favor of the thing that had been held back finding its proper place at last. The agreement he made is an agreement that cannot be revoked by what anyone else in that room wants or fears or works to prevent, not because he is infallible, and not because he is without influence from the people around him, but because the agreement was made from the part of him that is older than his position, from the part of him that carries the discernment of generations, from the bloodline inheritance of sight that does not bend to political pressure because it operates in a register that political pressure cannot reach. When that part of him agrees, it agrees absolutely. It agrees in the way that things agree when they are returning to their proper order rather than being imposed into an artificial one. You will be first, not eventually, not after more proving, more patience, more carrying the weight of a potential that the world is slowly catching up to. The agreement is already made. The order is already given. What you are watching now, if you look at your life with the eyes that this knowing gives you, is the process of that agreement making its way from the dimension where it was signed into the dimension where you live. The translation from the invisible into the visible. The movement of something that is already certain, becoming something that is also apparent. This is the part that requires you to do something different than what you have been doing. Not more work, not more strategy, not more patience in the resigned sense of patience that is really just the ongoing endurance of doubt. Something different. Something that will feel unfamiliar because you have been practicing its opposite for so long that the opposite has become the default. You have been practicing making yourself small enough not to threaten the people around you who need you to be smaller than you are. You have been practicing qualifying your gifts in rooms where the full expression of them would have made the other people in those rooms uncomfortable. You have been practicing the particular art of being just enough, enough to survive, enough to maintain relationships that required your diminishment as the price of entry. Enough to keep going without enough visible justification for continuing to believe what you have always believed about what is possible for you. You have been practicing being enough in a world that has been offering you just enough confirmation to keep you practicing. That practice ends now, not because it has served nothing, it has served something. It has kept you intact through years when intact was the only available option. It has preserved the thing in you that the king recognized, through all the years when that thing had no room to be anything other than preserved. But the period of preservation is over. The period of expression is beginning. And expression requires the particular courage of taking up the space that was always yours without the apology that you have learned to append to every claiming. In 2019, a study done at the University of Amsterdam followed a group of people who had been identified as consistently underperforming relative to their measured capability. What the researchers found when they looked at what those people had in common was not a skills gap, or a motivation gap, or even a resource gap in most cases. What they found was a recognition gap, the absence of a single person in a position of genuine authority who had seen them clearly and confirmed what they carried at a moment when the confirmation could change the trajectory of how they moved. Not praise, not encouragement, recognition, the specific penetrating acknowledgement of what is actually there. The study found that when that recognition arrived, even once, even years into a period of underperformance, the trajectory changed with a speed that the researchers described as disproportionate to what a single interaction should logically produce. Because the interaction was not giving them something new, it was unlocking something that had been present and inaccessible the whole time. The king's agreement is that recognition, and the trajectory is changing now with exactly that speed. Not because something is being given to you that you did not have before, because something that has been present and inaccessible is being unlocked. The door is not being opened into a new room. It is being opened into the room you have always been standing in, that has always been yours, that you have been standing in the dark version of while the light was always one recognition away from arriving. What the king saw in you goes beyond the personal. He has been in enough rooms and met enough people and made enough assessments across enough decades to understand the difference between a person who is individually gifted and a person whose gift carries a transmission that is meant to move beyond them. Both are real, both are valuable, but they are not the same thing, and what he recognized in you was not the former. What he recognized was a frequency that other people entrain to, a quality of presence that, when it is given full expression, changes the atmosphere of whatever space it enters, not through force or performance but through the simple, unmanipulable fact of being fully what it is. He has encountered this quality rarely enough that its appearance still stops him, still makes him reorganize his priorities around it, still makes him willing to put what is in front of it behind it because he understands what it means when this quality finally arrives at full expression, what it produces in the people who come into contact with it, what it changes in the spaces it moves through, what it offers to the people who have been searching for exactly the kind of permission that only this quality, expressed fully and without apology, can give them. The people who need what you carry cannot tell you that they need it because most of them do not have language for what it is. They know it when they encounter it. They feel it as the specific relief of being in the presence of something real after a long time in the presence of things that are very convincingly performed but are not real. They feel it as permission, the particular permission of watching someone be fully themselves, in a way that makes your own full selfhood feel possible in a way it did not feel possible before. They feel it as recognition of a different kind, not recognition of who they are specifically, but recognition of the thing they carry that the world around them has been systematically declining to confirm. You know what that feels like. You know it because you have been on the receiving end of its absence your entire life. That knowing is part of the gift. That knowing is what makes the transmission of what you carry not just a quality of being, but a quality of specific, targeted, precisely calibrated service to people who are in exactly the position you have been in. The position of carrying something real, with no one in a position of genuine authority confirming it, of waiting for a recognition that the people around them do not have the sight to give. of maintaining the thing they carry through years of its absence from the world's accounting without having any visible reason to trust that the accounting will eventually change. You are going to be that reason for them. You are going to be the king for someone who is where you were. And the agreement he made about you is an agreement that runs through you into them, that what they carry is real, that the delay is not the verdict, that the gap between their potential and their current reality is not the final word, that what has been held back will be returned with the kind of force that only sustained compression can produce. The circle is completing. The pattern is closing on itself in the way that all genuine patterns eventually do, in a wholeness that makes the difficulty of the middle necessary rather than meaningless. The middle was not pointless. The middle was the making of something that could not have been made in easier conditions. The middle was the training. The middle was the refinement. The middle was the building of exactly the specific capacity that this specific moment requires from exactly the specific person who went through exactly that specific fire. That person is you. The king looked across the room and he saw that. He agreed and he put you first, and the agreement is made and the order is given, and the only thing that is left is for you to receive it in the fullness that it was given, without the qualification, without the apology, without the practiced smallness that has kept you survivable in conditions that were never meant to be permanent. The conditions were never meant to be permanent. They were meant to produce you. They did. You are here. The king agreed. You are first. Take up the space. The next video on your screen carries the next piece of this. The piece about what happens in you when you receive fully instead of surviving carefully. What opens, what moves, what becomes possible in the life of a person who finally stops managing their magnitude and starts living from it. Click it now. Stay in what is opening. This is not the end of what began here. This is where it starts to move.